chapter 3 part G ਰੁਪਿੰਦਰ ਇਦਾਂ ਨਾ ਹਸਬੈਂਡ ਵਾਈਫ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਬਾਲੇ ਰੋਜ਼ ਹੀ ਲੜਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਇੱਕ ਦਿਨ ਕਿਤੇ ਨਾ ਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਵਾਈਫ ਡੇ ਵੀ ਆਉਂਦਾ ਨਾ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਮਦਰਸ ਡੇ ਫਾਦਰਸ ਡੇ ਵਾਈਫ ਡੇ ਤੇ ਹਸਬੈਂਡ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਘਰ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਵੀ ਭਗਵਾਨ ਨੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੰਨ 'ਚ ਕੋਈ ਐਸੀ ਮਿੱਠੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਵੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਪੈਰ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਤੇ ਨਾ ਲੱਗਣ ਵੀ ਮੈਂ ਇੰਨਾ ਖੁਸ਼ ਹਾਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਪੈਰ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਤੇ ਨਾ ਲੱਗਣ ਤੇ ਘਰ ਵਾਲੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੀ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਫਾਂਸੀ ਲੈ ਲਾ ਫਿਰ So, question number 21 about joint tenancy. Mr. and Mrs. Tom Jones and Ashraf Menzies have a signed contract of purchase and sale for triples owned by Alan Sinclair. Mr. and Mrs. Jones have agreed to pay 100,000 each and Ashraf has agreed to pay the balance of 50,000. So three people wanted to register as a joint tenant. Two people 100,000 each, one 50,000. They would like their ownership registered as a joint tenancy. So highlight joint tenancy. They want to register as a joint tenancy. Which of the following statement is true? Bottom line doesn't matter how much money you contribute. If one contribute 10,000, other contribute 1 million even. If they are registered as a joint tenant, they are equal owner. So they own 100%. One die, other becomes the owner. Same principle. So the answer number 1, Tom, Mrs. Jones and Ashraf cannot register their ownership as joint tenants because they didn't each contribute the same amount of cash. That's false. 2, if their interest is registered as joint tenancy, Tom, Mrs. Jones and Ashraf will each own an undivided interest in the triplex. That's true. 3rd, Tom and Mrs. Jones would be allowed to register their interest as a joint tenancy because they are man and wife. That's false. 4, Tom, Mrs. Jones and Ashraf cannot meet the 4 common law principles required to create a joint tenancy. That's false. It's only number 2. And then we go to the question number 8. This is about restrictive covenants. Now we can go back to the notes in the back and we read about and talk about restrictive covenants. Restrictive covenant means it imposes restrictions on the use of one person's land for the benefit of another person's land or another piece of land. It means, for example, you build a 3-story home and you can see a Seymour mountain from there, but your neighbor has a restriction that he cannot block your view. He can't block your view. He can't build a 3-story or something to block your view, and that restriction is binding, is enforceable upon your neighbor. Your neighbor is known as a covenanter and you will be known as a covenantee. Your covenantee neighbor is a covenanter, remember. Example is of view. And 3 things to remember. So there are 3 essentials to remember. Number 1, must be negative in nature. It's a negative for your neighbor. Number 2, right protected. It means it runs with the land. If you sell the property to somebody else, they enjoy the same right. And third is agreement binding. This agreement is enforceable. Neither you or nor your neighbor can violate it. So your neighbor can't build it, can't block your view. So remember 3 things: negative in nature, protected, right protected, and binding. So 3 things to remember. And how can you be released from there? Number 1, by express agreement. If both party agrees, then your neighbor can build. Number 2, open enjoyment of the land for many years inconsistent with it. Sometimes what happen, we buy a property here but we live in China and we don't use it. If we don't use it for a long period of time, so then you lose the right. Third, if character of neighborhood has changed. So basically if the neighborhood change, for example you have ranchers but now all surrounding properties have high rises now. Now your rancher looks very small there now. So now it means nothing there now. So basically, 3 things to remember: express agreement, open enjoyment, and character of neighborhood change. And now we can talk about these questions. We go back to the question number 8. They're asking which one of the following is not essential in order to constitute a restrictive covenant. So highlight not. Number 1, must be positive in nature. That's false. Number 2, must be negative in nature. True. Number third, covenant must retain property which is itself be protected. Highlight protected. That's true. The burden of this restriction must have been intended by the parties to bind. Bind means enforce. So highlight binding. Highlight bind. So that's true. So number 1 is false. Then you go from there to number 10. Where two neighbor landowners contracted to prevent one of them from putting his land to a certain use, they are said to have created a restrictive covenant. Is number 3. And then go from there to 17. There are three essential which must be established in law before the court will find a restrictive covenant indicate the exception. So find a false. It must be negative in nature. True. The community must retain property which will itself be protected. Highlight protected. That's true. The burden of the section must have intended by the parties to bind the land. Highlight bind. True. The covenanter must also retain the restricted property as any subsequent purchaser, any following buyer will not be a party to the note makes it false. If you sell to somebody else, so the anybody who's buying enjoys the same rights. So note makes it wrong here. So the subsequent buyer or following buyer enjoys the same right what you enjoy. So it's number 4 is the answer. And then we go to the 34. A limitation of restriction placed upon the use of one person's land for the benefit of another is called restrictive covenant. Number 3. And then from there we go to the 37. A restrictive covenant imposes restriction on the use of one person's land for the benefit of another piece of land. Which of the following statement concerning restrictive covenant is false? So find a false statement. Number 1. The covenant must be worded in negative terms. It should be negative nature, not terms. So that makes it false. Number 2. Restriction must be intended by parties to bind the land. Highlight bind. That's true. Person who agrees to be bound is called covenanter. That's also true. Restrictive covenant will not be enforceable where the character of neighborhood is changed. That's also true. So answer is number 1. And that's it for this part.